names. I'll give double punishment to some people. Please clear the aisles. Thank you so much for your patience and forbearance. We will optimize the time. I'd like to first invite Minister of Finance, Dr. Kasela Tuforsen, to take his seat. Put your hands together for Dr. Tuforsen. He's also a member of parliament for Ejuma Kwenyani Siam. Please put your hands together. Thank you, Doc. Please sit in the middle. And he set us off yesterday with his presentation. Thank you so much. The Minister for Energy and Green Transition, Honorable John Abdullahi Jinapo, MP for Yape Kusou. Please put your hands together for the Minister. Thank you so much, Honorable John Jinapo. It's a long walk to freedom. Please, John, thank you for being here. The Minister for Food and Agriculture is in the person of Honorable Agric Opoku. He is also MP for Esunafu South. Esunafu South. Put your hands together for Honorable Agric Opoku, aka Yenimsewa Bin Sujasu. Thank you so much. Like to also welcome the Honorable Minister for Trade, Agribusiness and Industry, Honorable Elizabeth Ofosue Jari. She is MP for Techiman North. Techiman North. Thank you so much, Honorable Minister. And I saw her in her session. I think Finance Minister was also in a session. She was taking questions already from yesterday, and they were grilling her. Private sector won't allow. The Minister for Labour, Jobs and Employment, Dr. Rashid Pelpo, is also MP for Was Central. Honorable Rashid Pelpo, thank you, sir. Oh, come on, put your hands together for Dr. Rashid Pelpo. And two very important members of this panel will be the Governor, Dr. Johnson Esiama. Please come up, sir. Thank you, Doc. Yes. Thank you, Doc, for being here as well. And of course, last but not least, is the chairman of NDPC, Dr. Nimoy Thompson. Thank you so much. Put your hands together for Doc. So the plan is that we've all heard a lot. And so I'm not going to do any interview. We've heard from 6 working groups who have made many recommendations. The good news is the document they've prepared will be made available to all of you. There is an abridged version and there's an exhaustive version. The chairman will run through the communique. What we want to do is to give each of you first, the sector ministers, a chance to reflect on what you've heard. Which of the things you've heard tickled your fancy? Because, for example, for every presentation, there were about 2 or 3 ministers I could point to. For example, private sector, they said things that affect Honorable Elizabeth. The infrastructure group, they touched on Agric, they touched on all kinds of things. So what I'm going to do is to start with the minister in the middle, finance minister, because you brought us here and you put us into all these problems. So I'm going to take your initial reaction to what you've heard, and I'll end with you as well. So give me your opening thoughts on anything you've heard that you believe can work, or any clarification you need, maybe in a couple of minutes, your opening thoughts on what you've heard. I'll do the same for the ministers, then I'll do governor, and then I'll do NDPC. So Honorable Atuforsen, you go first.
Thank you very much.
Sound.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Bernard. And let me first use this opportunity to thank the presenters and the participants for the excellent presentation that we have all observed. One thing for sure, they say like minds think alike. Most of the presentations actually feed into the very first presentation I made. And it clearly shows the connections and the understanding that together we understand the situation and the problems of this country. What is left is a resolve to come together and to fix it. Implementation is the challenge. But we can only implement as a government if we get the buy-in of the citizens. What I would like to say is that beginning 11th of March, the government will introduce the 2025 budget statement and economic policy. Most of the concerns you've raised, you'll begin to see them in the budget. But don't leave the government alone. We call on you to support the government in educating the public, for the public to understand that the time has come for us to reset and reform the economy. We've got to do this together. And so clearly, what I can say is most striking to me, particularly sitting there quietly, is the interconnectedness between the macro group to the private sector, to infrastructure, to all the other sectors, even to the governance and the corruption subsector, the need for us to do major reforms. And so the solution is there. We know the problems. We know what we have to do to resolve the problems. Let's start the implementation.
Wow.
And so I will wait for the communique. Then so together, I can use the communique as my Bible going into the preparation of the budget and to make recommendations to cabinet for adoption and approval.
Wonderful.
For us to input in.
Thank you very much. Please hands together for him. Honorable Minister for Energy, Structural Reform and Infrastructure were very clearly in your alley, as well as others. What are your initial reactions to what you heard? Honorable John Jinapo, thank you.
Hello. Thank you very much. Quite scary looking at the issues with ECG, but not surprising, particularly in the energy sector. Like Mr. President said, today I had a briefing and the outstanding liabilities so far is about 80 billion, and it keeps increasing. 80 billion cedis. That's outstanding liabilities. And so today, if you were to put the energy sector back on its toes, you would have to cough up 80 billion to flush out the outstanding liabilities. Clearly, that's unsustainable. But even more worrying is the mounting liabilities. Assuming you were to deal with only 80 billion, then that wouldn't be the major problem. The major problem is that we have a total bill of about $175 million every month, especially with the power sector. The collection is less than 100 million. And so even going forward, if nothing is done, you're going to be incurring about $70 million every month as a shortfall or liability. And so that for me is a major issue. I take three things that I think we should be looking at. The first one has to do with ensuring that there's a high level of discipline and efficiency in the sector. In 2023, the PURC approved about $200 million as a cap in terms of capex for ECG. By the end of the year, they had incurred 700 million. So 500 million more than had been approved. What it means is that that 500 million was not factored in the tariff structure. And so the indiscipline alone is a major factor. Two is that it's quite obvious that we need a private sector participation in the management of the distribution sector. If we don't do that, the sector will collapse. And we are headed for that collapse. Already, some power producers have shut their plants today, as we speak, over non-payment of their bills. So it's something that you can't have a shortcut. You must necessarily take those tough decisions. And then finally, from what I am seeing, we immediately have to move into a gas to power era. The liquid fuel bills alone is about 1 billion this year. Half of that can build a gas processing plant. That will save us about 600 million per annum. And so for me, that is something, it's non-negotiable. We have stranded gas. We cannot use the little we have to buy liquid fuel. We must bring that gas processing plant on and cut the cost. That will also cut the corruption and cut the wastage. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Put your hands together for him. So 3 clear action points. Minister for Agric, about 5 of the areas I could see your face there. Growth without debt, I saw something. Private sector, you are there. Even macro stability, you are there. Structural reform and infrastructure. What have you heard so far, and any specific things you want to do based on what you've heard from the recommendations? Dr. Rikopoku.
Thank you very much. Listening to the presentations, I've come to appreciate the need for our sector to look at some of the expenditures that we incur. Over the past 3 years, the sector received a budgetary allocation of 3 billion Ghana cedi. But 51% of this allocation goes into subsidies, payment of subsidies. And this is 3 times bigger than capital expenditure that the ministry incurs.
Wow.
I think there is the need for us to redirect some of these expenditures from less impactful, inefficient programs, shift the resources from recurrent expenditures that have no impact to capital investment in the form of infrastructure, in the form of research, in the form of innovation, to make the sector more productive so that we can impact significantly on food production in the country. But to be able to do this, the first thing we have to do is to conduct expenditure survey in the sector to ascertain which particular programs we can do away with. We have to replace blanket subsidies with target support, and then remove redundant programs, and then also consolidate overlapping initiatives so that at the end of the day, we can deliver on the mandate. Then again, we have been producing raw materials and exporting raw materials. We have 10 players in the sector to be hewers of wood and drawers of water. There is the need for us to establish a strong relationship between agriculture and industry. That relationship must be symbiotic, mutually beneficial, so that we can generate jobs, create employment for our people, and ensure food sufficiency for the teeming youth of our nation. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So if you are following, they are giving us bullet points. Energy Minister gave us 3: high level of discipline, PSP in distribution, gas to power plants. Agric Minister has given us 2: expenditure reprioritization from current to capital, and then relation between agric and industry. So we like the way it's going. Honorable Minister for Trade, as for you, you were there with them the whole day. So I'm sure you're ready to tell us the key things you want to pick from what you've heard so far. So let's receive Honorable Elizabeth Ejari to give us a quick takeaways.
Thank you very much. As you rightly said, I had the opportunity to sit through the section, and it was amazing the kind of energy the private sector brought to bear in bringing out what they think can help grow the economy. I'm also of the opinion that if you want to help a group of people, you need to listen to them. They have indicated that if the macroeconomic environment is good, there are business people, they know how to thrive. And so we should work on our debt to GDP ratio. We should make sure that our sovereign rating is good. And if that happens, the private sector will thrive. Again, they also spoke about policy consistency. So I'm also of the opinion that policies must be carefully thought through. So this 24-hour economy policy will be discussed thoroughly with them so that it will be acceptable by the whole country. So if it happens like that, then years thereafter, it will stay and people can plan with it. I also saw a group of people who are stakeholders in this trade, agribusiness and industry that want government to assist them in the area of financing. Financing is very expensive in the country and doesn't make them competitive. And so the finance minister is here and he heard that. So I'm sure together we'll work towards creating the environment for them to get good financing. One thing I'm also willing to work with them is the coordination within the agencies. In the Ministry of Trade, Agribusiness and Industry is the BRR unit. That unit coordinates business registration and things like that. They don't have the backing, so we are coming up with an act to make sure that the things that they ask for, the agencies are required by law to provide for them. If it happens like that, business can be done expeditiously. We also look at land banks As a lawyer of 20 years standing, I know the number of years that you stay in the courtroom to get justice for land litigation. And so the business sector is not willing to be associated with acquisition of land. They want government to take the lead in this area. And I can assure them that we've already started discussion for more land banks to aid businesses in the country. SOEs. Abna was emphatic. She spent time with me before the discussion that the best way to go is to list them. Abna, I've heard it.
Yes, please.
I'm sure that government will look at listing SOEs and make sure that we get some of our funding locally. That's the only way our pension funds will grow for us to get good pensions. Again, we also look at making sure that we add value to our produce. And so this is agribusiness, and it's now the new boy on the block. We are sure that will support people in agribusiness to grow. If you look at our Feed the Industry program, it's not only about agricultural produce, it's also about raw material, because one of industry's major problems is the production of raw materials locally. It will surprise you to know that industry is importing about 90% of their raw materials. And so the Feed the Industry program will help material.
Sorry.
Not. Yes. We are not looking at agri-produce, looking at bauxite production and what have you. So I'm not, if we get some of our raw materials to help. And so by and large, I'm with the private sector. And I promise that my name is Elizabeth Ufuswejari, Minister for Trade, Agribusiness. I will be at the meeting in the next 2 months to make sure that together we build a robust trade, agribusiness, and industry sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. We asked for 2, you gave us 6. So you really, it's like the women want to show they can do better. Policy consistency, financing, coordinating agencies, land banks on land litigation, listing SOEs, and value addition. Feed the Industry program. Put your hands together for the minister as well. My friend Dr. Rashid Purple, you are in a tight corner now because she's listed 6 and you are the Minister for Labor, Jobs and Employment. So what have you heard so far? Any reactions or specific action points from what you've heard, Dr. Purple?
Well, thank you very much. I got excited about the fact that we are resetting Ghana and our focus is on the economy. Just a few weeks ago, I had a discussion with our working people of Ghana, the leadership. We had terrible, very, very serious negotiations to the point that I almost felt that I wasn't going to make it with the workers and agreeing on some specific issue which government was bent on going on, which was that we could only offer up to 10% of an increase in the base pay. But I began to reflect on it after looking at everything that happened, and I asked myself, the first time they requested an increment was up to 35%. The finance minister almost collapsed. And he said 35% will mean that the total earnings of this economy is going to be paid to workers, meaning we will have nothing more to do. Then, so I looked at it all and I said, look, in coming here and in listening to everything, is labor that is going to be the focus. How do we satisfy the basic needs of our labor? It's about a strong economy, a viable economy. It's about a strong private sector that can produce workers, that can produce the required pay, they require to be able to function well as Ghanaians. It's about to ensure that we have a strong agriculture output, strong ways of producing more. So everything you can imagine happening here in the economy, creating value, will have to do with increasing production, creating more jobs, Because in my ministry, I start from how do we create jobs for the people? You get a jobs. Then you go to the next point. How do we get to make sure that these workers are properly remunerated? Then you get to the point, they are going on pension. How do you get them paid after they have worked completely, satisfied that they are earning what they have saved for? So it has to deal with the overall nature of the economy. So for everything that is said here, every increment, every positive direction we are moving will have to have a consequential effect on the positive impact it's going to have on our Ghanaian worker. And so listening to every presentation here, I just got satisfied that there is an aim towards creating more wealth, creating more jobs, ensuring that the working people of this country are properly remunerated for what they have done or what they do to create the country we want. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There was a suggestion from the committee that they should change, was it Fair Wages Commission to National Product something. Can you mention, Abna, what was it? I want to put that directly to him. Fair Wages Commission to what? National Remuneration and what? And Productivity Commission.
Yes.
From Fair Wages to Productivity Commission. Is this something you can take up?
Yeah, this is reading the labor law. It will reflect very well our objective in paying people for what they have done. The whole impact of getting people to work is to earn what you work for. And so the name should truly reflect the conception of the labor directive, the labor legal frame we have put in place, that we intend to create working people. We intend that they will work and they will be paid according to what they work for. So wages and fair wages and salaries doesn't reflect it much. So I agree with that suggestion.
You agree with them?
Yes.
All right. Good luck in cabinet as you debate, as you move to push that forward. Thank you. Let's present you Dr. Pelpo. Thank you so much. Now, the macroeconomic stability has two legs, fiscal and monetary. The monetary leg is Dr. Johnson Esiama, and the fiscal leg is Dr. Atu Forsen. So, Doc, anything you've heard a lot. What are your quick thoughts and any action points from your side on what you can do with the recommendations? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Bernard. Like you rightly said, our group, we had some very exciting conversations, a lot of takeaways. Our rapporteur has already run through those, and so I agree, on each of them. He mentioned things like the need to coordinate our affairs with the fiscal authorities better.
Yeah.
And I can assure you that we are going to do just that.
Okay.
We are going to coordinate not only at the top levels, but then operationally. We used to do it those days.
Okay.
And so we are just going to intensify it. We mentioned things like the fintechs and their importance, the financial technology firms. There's a linkage between the fintechs that are into remittances, and then also these days you hear about crypto transactions. These are significant, and it's something that we are looking into. Our committee recommended that we should probe it further, and so that is going to happen. Now, listening to the private sector group, for me, they made my day.
Okay.
They asked two things, and I want to assure them that we are going to do exactly that.
Okay. What are the two things?
Now, the first one is that they want to meet with us twice every year.
Okay.
And that underscores our vision, that look, we have to be transparent. It is about restoring the public trust. It is about getting Ghanaians to understand what we do as a central bank. And so I was telling the Guta president, for example, I told him we are coming to Makola.
Correct.
We are coming to sit with them.
Okay.
And we will get them to understand why, for example, we need to jack up the rate, or why we need to lower the rate. When I assumed duty, one of the things I said was, with the Monetary Policy Committee, you notice that up to now, you don't get to hear why individual members opted for whether the rate should stay the same or should be increased or lowered. You don't get to hear that. All that you hear is it is a unanimous decision. But in actual fact, there are divergent views, you know, through those sessions. And so what we are going to be doing now is individual members' submissions will be published.
Wow.
And that is going to happen from this month.
Okay.
So you get to understand the basis for which actions were taken.
Wow.
And for me, that is at the core of what we do. We want the academia, we want the media, we want the private sector themselves to understand that we are in the same boat.
Okay.
You know, sometimes you need to increase the rate not because you don't want to see lower lending rates. You want to see lower lending rates, but where there is a risk, for example, to the exchange rate, where there is a risk in terms of your inflation path, then you have to, go on that tangent. But in whatever we do, it's important that stakeholders understand. And so, therefore, members of the Monetary Policy Committee will be accountable this time. The public will get to hear why they did what they did, and we will publish it in the newspapers the day after the Monetary Policy Committee meetings end.
Wonderful.
Now, the second thing has to do with the demand by the private sector group that they meet with us twice yearly or so. You know, in 2016, when we amended the Bank of Ghana Act, we provided that Bank of Ghana reports to Parliament on its operations twice yearly. Now, I want to believe that they have been doing that. Reports are sent to Parliament, but I'm not sure if those reports are analyzed. So, it falls very much in line with the demand from the private sector group. Each time we send those reports to Parliament, we are happy to engage in a town hall with the private sector.
Wow.
We will be there. All of us will be there, members of the Monetary Policy Committee, we will be there, and we are happy to take questions from the private sector.
Okay.
But in doing all this, let me emphasize again the need to coordinate affairs with the fiscal authorities.
Correct.
One thing that came, and I believe our rapporteur mentioned it, is that currently, yes, T-bill rates are coming down. And it is good to see that. However, there is an emerging risk that if we are not careful, we will see pressure on the CD going up as a result. And so again, if you look at our Bank of Ghana bills, you would see that the rate, has had to go up. That's the way the managing the macroeconomy works. And therefore, there has to be a balance. So again, that underscores why we need that kind of coordination with the fiscal authorities. And we'll be doing that. I'll be speaking with the Minister of Finance regularly, and we will try to achieve that balance going forward. We'll be transparent. But let me end with just one more point on the area of financial sector stability. We have the financial sector strengthening strategy, going on under the fund program, and we are going to continue with that. However, an elephant in the room has to do with the high levels of NPLs, what we call non-performing loans. To give you the seriousness of that, You know, we have local banks and we have foreign banks. There's a local bank whose NPL is about 81%. What it means is that every 100 Ghana cedis they lend, they are not able to collect 81 cedis back. Another local bank has about 62%. Now, the highest for the foreign banks is about 21%, I guess. So, these numbers tell you that we need to address the NPL issue. You cannot blame the banks entirely because a lot of it has to do with the domestic debt exchange, you know, which was as a result of, you know, not as a result of, you know, anything that the banks did. But it's a problem we have to contend with. Because remember, that also explains why lending rates are high.
Okay.
It is not pleasant to us to see the private sector borrow at such very high levels. And so going forward, we have to find out ways to reduce the high non-performing loans ratios across banks.
Okay.
And for me, I'm particularly interested in the local banks, especially the government-owned banks. We'll be sitting down with them. We'll be sitting down with the industry association of banks. We started those conversations already. And we believe that if we are able to lower the NPL ratios of banks, if we are able to stabilize the fiscal side of things, we should see lending rates trending down, you know, quickly. We are resolved to achieve that. But as I said, we'll be transparent.
Wonderful.
If we have to take the difficult decisions, we want the public to understand why we have to take those difficult decisions.
Wonderful. We appreciate this. Put your hands together for him. I just wanted a last one. The private sector group under recommendation 7, high cost of production, they suggested that you channel the cash reserve requirement into credit creation for import substitution or export-driven production. Did I quote you right?
That is true. So that issue is actually under consideration.
Correct.
What it is that somewhere last year or so, these differentiated reserve requirements were introduced. I wasn't in office at the time, but I know that it is a huge burden on financial intermediation. More so when banks have to keep the same level of reserve requirements, irrespective of the currency in which the deposit was taken. I can assure you that at the next MPC, we are going to change that.
Wow.
Because it is causing some distortions in the industry. We will introduce the like for like. So if the deposit is in US dollar, they maintain the reserve requirements in the US dollar. They don't have to change it into cedis. That will be done. Now, when it comes to the differentiated ones, that is the meat of the issue. Now, those balances are not rewarded at the central bank, and that is true. What do we do with it? Should the central bank become a credit administrator? Should we be lending on our own? That is not our mandate. If you ask my own views, and remember we are under an IMF program, so it's not something we can just do on our own. We need to have conversations with the fund, etc. If you ask my own views, what should be done about those balances? I'm sure you've heard about GESA.
Yes.
The Ghana Incentive
Risk-based lending for agriculture.
That scheme has a lot of promise.
Correct.
They basically act like a guarantee fund to facilitate lending, to the agricultural sector. And so, if I had my way, I would want to commit part of those funds to augment the guarantee fund for GESA. Because once I do that, I facilitate lending to the agricultural sector. Currently, I have to check what the balance is, but I believe it's over 50 billion Ghana cedis currently. If I can get even 10 billion or 20 billion to augment that guarantee fund,
Wow.
we may be able to increase, lending, private sector lending in terms of agriculture.
Wow.
So I want to assure you that we are looking at it.
Wonderful.
We will engage the IMF, we will engage the other authorities if we are able, if they give us the leeway. We'll look at how we can commit those funds productively. But that said, the banks are better able to deploy those. And so in the medium term, we should be looking at how to return those funds to the banks.
Wonderful.
And again, in returning those funds to the banks, it has to be in a phased manner.
Okay.
If you just let all that liquidity into the system, chances are that you'll see the CD, jacking up against the dollar immediately.
Okay.
So just to say that we are looking at that issue, we are aware of the problem it's causing for the banks.
Yeah.
We are looking at the best way of approach, whether to deploy these to productive sectors, whether to give it back to banks, whether to give it to them in a phased manner. That is something we will determine hopefully before the end of this month.
You're on a roll. You're on a roll. This one there, Johnson Twasu. Wonderful. Our Greek minister is grinning from ear to ear. You are happy on the guest house point. So he says if he has his way, so may you have your way. Amen. Let me end the session with Dr. Nimwe Thompson. So I suspect you're on this because you give a sort of permanency to all of this. Otherwise it becomes a talk shop because NDPC holds the plan. So 2 points. How heartened are you about what you've heard? And what can we do with all of this to fit into the development plan? That's your question.
Okay, thank you very much. Obviously, the complexity of the issues are such that we can't possibly do justice to them in 2 days. So as time goes by, we are going to refine them. You rightly said NDPC is going to play a critical mediating role in getting all these, most if not all the recommendations into the President's Coordinated Program, whose preparation NDPC leads, into the medium-term development policy framework, which we also lead, and then the annual work plans of all the MDAs that must incorporate these recommendations into the plans, and we must approve them in conjunction with the Ministry of Finance before they can get funding for that. And so we play that critical role in making sure that these recommendations, these lofty recommendations, find expression in policy. But I would like to play the devil's advocate with 2 points, and then I'll make 2 development-oriented points also. So 4 in all. The first one has to do with one of the recommendations that we should have a debt-GDP ratio of 60%. That, of course, is quite common. No one really seems to know where that 60% came from. Some people trace it to the formation of the EU in 1992 that came up. But what's so magical about 60? What about 61 or 59? As I speak now, the debt-GDP ratio, the highest debt-GDP ratio in the world is 255%, and that's Japan. So does that mean that if we get 60%, our economy, or Japan's economy is so badly run that we get 60%, we'll be better off than Japan? No. There are other indicators that we really need to pay attention to. In this case, besides the debt-GDP ratio, you also need to look at debt service as a share of your revenue. And this is where the critical difference comes in. So Japan may have 255%, but its debt service as a share of revenue is only about 9%. Ours is about, I thought it was 55, but when Leslie did his presentation, he said it was 64. I don't know, I have to look for the latest. But even if we use 50, it's quite high. So that is where we need to pay attention. Not that, I'm not saying that we should go out there and borrow anyhow because Japan has 255. But in making these recommendations, we need to also bear in mind certain other issues that have implications for our ability to manage our debt sustainably. The second one is a statistic that I've seen thrown about so much especially in the media, when you go to various reputable government websites, you see them. And since they relate to private sector development, I thought I should deal with that, which is the claim that the SMEs in Ghana account for 70% of GDP. It sounds impressive, but it's simply not correct. And it's important, I'm not playing down the relevance of SMEs at all. But if we are to help them, it's critical that we get the figures or the statistic correctly so that we can design interventions appropriately. Now, SMEs in Ghana are almost all in the informal sector. If you go to Ghana Commercial Bank's website, they have a report there on SMEs. Some of the biggest ones that happen to be in the formal sector are like the largest importer of cooking oil, for example. That doesn't add much value to GDP because GDP is gross value added. So if you look at the GDP figures, you see that the informal sector accounts for around 20%, 27% of GDP. And if we account for the remaining SMEs being the formal part, then at most, SMEs may account for 30% of GDP. Again, I'm not diminishing their relevance, but I want us to have the correct numbers to be able to formulate the right scale of interventions. The global average is 35%. So 30% is way out there. What we probably mean is that they account for between 70 and 80% of employment. That is different from accounting for GDP. And SMEs in general, globally, tend to have much lower productivity, and so their contribution, not just in Ghana, around the world, is relatively small compared to larger enterprises. So if you Google, you see a story that says, why did productivity increase during the COVID pandemic? And the explanation is that most SMEs closed and it was left with only the large ones. So I thought I should throw that in there. The issue of productivity also came up, and for those in the macroeconomic part, they may recall the passion with which I raised the issue of productivity. That's because in the past 3 years, I was in South Africa working on a project on productivity. It was so successful that it was actually adopted in 2023 by the BRICS group. And during the technical discussions, the representative from India said that there was no way BRICS can play its expected role in the global economy without increasing productivity. It's a much more complex thing. But I was very happy that she stated it that way, and now is the platform. It's called Productivity Ecosystems Platform. So I brought it back with me, and I have that passion. As a result, I look at productivity as the golden key, so to speak, to unlocking our development challenges. Productivity in the private sector, which we've talked a lot about, but not so much in the public sector, which is also very critical. Indeed, the ability of the private sector to succeed is contingent upon productivity in the public sector. As long as the public sector remains suboptimal, it will not be able to support that. And just as I did with the macro people, I'm going to show my evidence here. I brought a little speaker with me from South Africa. You know, all buggers like to bring things to Ghana, just to show that you traveled. And the speaker is like the size of this one here. They wouldn't allow me to board the plane with it because of the magnet in there. They said it will interfere with the plane's communication system. So it had to be separate. So I arrived on a Saturday. On Tuesday, I got a call from a lady. I thought it was a wrong call because in the background, I could hear her saying, so I thought it was a chop bar or something. She was actually talking to me and at the same time ordering food. So right away, I should have known that this thing wouldn't go so well. Oh, Lord. So I spoke to her and she said, your speaker is here, you should... So I said, where can I pick it up? She said, no. You have to get a clearing agent. And this happened to me in 1998, so it means nothing has changed. So I got the clearing agent. The long and short of it is that it took us almost 2 weeks to clear a speaker this size with 28 pages of needless bureaucracy. Wow. In a country that prides itself on digitization. Now, what would have been the comparable situation in South Africa, where I also used to order? There, you would get a digital notification with a QR code. And you walk in there, and there's a scanner. You show it to the scanner. The young man walks into the strong room. In less than 5 minutes, if there's no queue, you get your speaker and you walk out. So here you see the disparity in productivity, where things that can be produced in 5 minutes, maximum 15 minutes in other jurisdictions, are being produced over 2 weeks. That's a cost to government. And if I were a businessman, that would also be a cost to me running my business.
Right.
And if you multiply that across number of transactions in a year, that's billions of cedis in lost productivity to the economy.
Wow.
And then,
wonderful.
yeah, thank you for that. And then the last point, I did mention the coordinating role of the commission in terms of planning. The commission also is into monitoring the performance of government. It is not an implementing agency. It simply monitors and makes policies. But there's a third area also of research. And here, in terms of researching the economy, we've decided to redefine what we mean by economic growth. Because typically, when we say growth, the first thing we do is to go for GDP. And the average Ghanaian, frankly, doesn't know what GDP is, and they don't give a damn. GDP, you can put robots in a factory, replace human workers with robots in a factory, and GDP may grow from 5% to 20%. It doesn't translate into any improvements in our living conditions. So we are moving from the Commission's perspective and its contribution to the research from a one-dimensional understanding of growth to a 3D or three-dimensional conception of growth, which is growth in output, i.e. GDP, growth in employment, and growth in wages.
Wow.
And cutting through all three of them is going to be productivity. And I'm happy to say that we are going to support that with the appropriate research to support the government and also our various partners. Obviously, we have a lot to say, but with me, if you leave the mic with me, I'll talk forever. So let me end.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Wow. Growth in output, growth in employment, and growth in wages. Amazing stuff. I think the panel deserves a round of applause. Let's put hands together for them. We have a lot of questions, but when you do media interviews, you explain the rest to the public. So you can go and take your seat now. Thank you very much. Indeed. Wow. I thought that was wonderful. What do you guys think? Really, really good. So please come and clear the furniture if possible so that I bring the chair back. So pardon the pun. So if you can clear the chairs so I bring the chairman. You get my flow. So we're going to bring up the committee chair and conference chair who set us off to do two very important things. He will present the communique, and then he would also pave the way for our special guest of honor, who is the Vice President, to bring us the closing keynote. And we really want to thank you, Madam Vice President, for staying throughout the whole session, both the first day and the second day. So we want to thank our TV audiences for staying with us. We're very happy that you've dedicated quality airtime to this important national exercise. It's had a truly national character. And I just want us to put hands together for the team that put this together again. So somebody should come and help me bring the what's this thing called? Is it a pulpit? I forget.